Hi friends, how are you? I'm Nicole and this is Crimes with Cole. So, hello. How are you guys doing today? I hope you all are having an amazing day. I hope you guys had an amazing weekend and had a great Thanksgiving if you celebrated. I hope you were really able to just be with loved ones and really just enjoy the day and really just appreciate what you have in life so far. So, in today's case, we will be talking about the case of Marilyn McIntyre. Now, this case went cold for years and years, and when the police decided to stir the pot a little bit from a random phone call they had received, they started digging into this cold case, and it actually ended up spooking the killer. And because of that, his actions ended up giving it away and solving the case. So you'll have to let me know if you guys have ever heard of this case, but let's just get into it. This is the case of Marilyn McIntyre. Marilyn had become a wife to her high school sweetheart, Lane McIntyre, and they had welcomed a baby boy into the world back in 1980. In the early hours of the morning, on March 11th, 1980, Lane had left his third shift job at this local paper plant to return home. Now, as he walked up the path to his front door, he noticed that the dog was outside. He was out back, tied up, and he thought to himself, that's kind of strange for the dog to be tied up outside at these hours of the morning. Why would the dog be outside? But, he just continued on to the front door. I mean, he just got off work. He might be tired. And when he went to head inside, Lane had opened up the front door and he saw his 18-year-old wife lying on the floor with a knife sticking out of her chest, bruises all over her face from being bludgeoned, and strangulation marks around her neck. Now, after taking in this initial shock, Lane ran back to the bedroom down the hall to check on their 3-month-old son, Christopher. Baby Christopher had just been lying in his crib, asleep and unharmed, thank the Lord. And as Lane returned back to the front entranceway where his wife was lying, the police were called, and they came to the house rather quickly. As they arrived and started to examine the scene, they noticed that there was no sign of forced entry. So that would only mean that Marilyn must have known who this person was and let them in. The point of interest quickly turned to Lane. Although he had an alibi, it was not an airtight one, but he did have an alibi. Lane worked at the local paper plant on third shift, and his time card did support that he was at work. It supported his alibi. However, Lane's job allowed him to take breaks during his shift without having to report it to someone. So he could have taken, like a smoke break. He could have taken a lunch break. He could have taken whatever kind of break and not necessarily had to clock out and then clock back in. He didn't necessarily have to tell his supervisor. I'm sure he would have told, one or two of his coworkers, hey, I'm going to step outside real quick. But he didn't have to. So Lane could have easily came home, killed his wife, and then returned to work. When police discovered that Lane had taken a life insurance policy out on his young wife just a few days before her death, this reassured them that he now has a motive. Since there was no hardcore evidence to link Lane to his wife's death, the police started to question the neighbors and, try to kind of find out more details of when this happened. The neighbors said that they heard the dog barking around 3 a.m. The police collected fingerprints. They found blood stains as well as hair from an unknown source. After the autopsy was done, it was noted that the steak knife that was plunged into Marilyn's chest was done so after she had been killed. As the more people that the police had started to question, the more the police began to turn their interest to another man by the name of Curtis Forbes. Curtis was friends with Lane from, back in high school and was dating a girl by the name of Deborah Adelson. Marilyn had told Deborah that she needed to leave Curtis. This infuriated Curtis. Curtis had an alibi, but it was not very good. He said that the night of Marilyn's murder, he had went out to the bar and around 1 a.m., he had left that bar to go see his friend Lori Beadle and her boyfriend. After arriving at Lori and her boyfriend's house, Curtis then left shortly after to go get more beer, except he had never returned to Lori and the boyfriend's house. He said he had decided that he was just going to go to Deborah's house and arrived there around 4 a.m., according to Deborah. So let's say that he stayed at Lori and the boyfriend's house for like 30 minutes or so. I mean, that's still enough time to go, BS, drink a few beers, and then leave to go get more. So 1:30 a.m. till 4 a.m., I mean, that's a 2.5 hour window that Curtis couldn't quite clarify where exactly he was. And the biggest, what I would consider a red flag of this entire case was that after Curtis had been questioned by the police, he packed his bags and left town a few days later. That's just very suspicious. I mean, why are you leaving town if you never had plans to leave town in the first place? But there was no hardcore evidence linking Curtis to the crime, so they weren't able to arrest him. For 27 years, Marilyn's family went without the answer of who had taken her life. They didn't know why, they didn't know who, they just knew that someone had taken Marilyn's life. The town people said it was Lane, and whispers around town actually ended up ruining his reputation, leading him to become, estranged from his son. And I would assume that Marilyn's parents probably swooped in and got custody of that baby when everything was happening. I'm not sure if they necessarily thought that Lane was the one who did this, but I would assume whether it was his parents or hers, someone swooped in and got custody of that baby, and that's probably what started the estranged relationship with his son. Now, after all of those years, Marilyn's niece accidentally had called Columbia County Sheriff's Office instead of Columbus Police Department in 2007. Now, because of this, the detectives actually decided that they were going to look back into the case and reinvestigate. The blood sample that had been collected that night, it was sent off to a lab to be analyzed with the new DNA technology that they had in 2007 compared to the 80s. It showed Marilyn and someone else's blood, which cleared up Lane. But, his reputation was already destroyed by this point. They shifted their focus once again onto Curtis. They started re-interviewing everyone they had previously interviewed, and what they discovered was quite interesting. Lori said that she recalls that Diana told her how Curtis finally had arrived at her house that night around 4 a.m. and he had asked her to wash his shirt because there was blood on it. Now, when Deborah told Lori this, Lori was under the assumption that Deborah had already told the police this. So that's why Lori didn't say anything about it. But while that was useful information, it was not as useful now as it would have been back then. They decided to exhume Marilyn's body to see if there was any DNA under her fingernails possibly. The investigators decided to really publicize this, hoping that it would spook the killer. Once the body was exhumed, it was so decomposed that there was really no way that they could get DNA evidence. But they weren't going to come out and just say that. So they had played it off like they were obtaining the evidence that they needed. They kept a close eye on Curtis for months after they exhumed Marilyn's body, and they noticed that Curtis was contacting a carpenters union in Hawaii. It was discovered that Curtis wanted to basically fake his own death. He was going to take a boat along with an inflatable raft out onto Lake Michigan and sink it, making it seem like he had drowned. Then he would use the inflatable raft to make it back to shore and flee. Deborah, his now wife, had confirmed he did indeed have blood on his shirt that night that he had came over, and that her mother had actually washed it for him. All of this gave the police enough grounds to arrest him. They got a DNA sample and they tested it. When it came back matching the other half, he was charged with first-degree murder. After deliberating for only 2.5 hours, the jury found him guilty in November 2010, and he was sentenced to life. How crazy is that story? With just one accidental phone call and just some curious investigators and new DNA technology, they were able to solve Marilyn's case 27 years later. So, you guys will have to let me know what you think. And until next time, please remember to be safe. And I will see you then. Bye.